Hello everyone and welcome to Finding Solutions. I'm Dan Albas, the Member of Parliament for Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna, and this podcast is where we feature the people putting in the hard work every day to build a stronger community and a stronger Canada. This is another part of our ongoing segment on Okanagan Stories and Solutions, where we take time to learn from the people that are helping shape our communities and explore their practical solutions to the challenges we face. And we're very fortunate today. We're joined by Jason Brolund, Fire Chief of West Kelowna Fire Rescue. Thank you for being here. Jason has spent nearly 3 decades in emergency service, and after serving with the Kelowna Fire Department, including as the Deputy Fire Chief, he became the Fire Chief of West Kelowna Fire Rescue in 2015. He serves both the City of West Kelowna and Westbank First Nation, and has became widely known for his leadership during the McDougall Creek wildfire in August of 2023, one of the most significant wildfire emergencies in our region's history. He has since become a leading voice on wildfire resilience, emergency preparedness, and FireSmart principles in both British Columbia and beyond. He's even spoken in the United Nations, and so I look forward to talking to him about that. Chief, welcome to Finding Solutions. Now, before we get into talking about wildfires, let's just talk about you a little bit. So you grew up here in the central Okanagan. What was it like growing up in this region, and how has the Okanagan shaped you?
Yeah, born and raised here, one of the few people, that you bump into that can say that these days. It was such a privilege to grow up here, spending my summers at the lake, and now doing the same thing with my family has been really incredible. But also such a pleasure to serve here. I really feel strongly about protecting my community. I went to school down the street from my office, and that there's a lot of. I'm very happy to be able to serve that way.
You're very anchored to the community. So, what attracted you first to emergency services and specifically firefighting?
Yeah, it wasn't my first path. My educational background is computer science, believe it or not. I went to university for that, and now that has all eclipsed me, and my knowledge is long since gone. But I as a young teenager growing up, saw the work of the fire department, witnessed men and women getting on to fascinating pieces of equipment and rushing to emergencies and making a difference, and knew that was something I wanted to do, and I was able to pursue that as a volunteer for many years, and it just happened to come to pass that I had the opportunity to pursue it as a career, and for me now 31 years later, there was no looking back.
Was there a particular moment where you suddenly said, this isn't going to be a job for me, this is going to be a career?
Yeah, it goes back to like the earliest first days at the fire hall, right? Immediately, anyone who walks into a fire hall sees that it is a different environment. It is driven by team, and it is driven by mission and purpose. And it's appealing to people because it's driven by being prepared but not knowing what comes next. And it's one of the most fascinating pieces of the job, even for me today, in the position that I'm at and the time in my career. We still come to work every day, put on the uniform, and we don't know what that day is going to consist of. We might think we have an idea, but it can change in a moment, and it makes it a really fun place to work.
So you've gone from being a firefighter on the front lines to now leading an entire fire service. So what have you learned about leadership along the way?
Yeah, it's required me to really examine who I am and to change my style. I would say a number of times throughout my career. The fire service at its roots is very paramilitary. A lot of the things you see in a military culture we have adopted, and there's a really good reason for that. Things like taking orders, having a chain of command. It's critical when an emergency happens that we move fast and we do it in a safe way and we're deliberate about it, and that's where that paramilitary kind of rank structure comes in. But that's only a small part of what we do. The larger part of what we do is just the day-to-day being ready and training building a team and working together, and that calls for an entirely different, sort of leadership structure and culture. So get to have our feet in both of those. But the biggest thing that I'm still learning today, and it's being reinforced for me, is the value of relationships. And it may be building relationships with new staff members, new firefighters on the job, getting to know about them and their family, and making them feel like they're part of a team. Or it could be, building relationships with external stakeholders. And, we do that all the time, because when an emergency comes, that is not the time for us to have met for the first time with, our friends from BC Hydro or the BC Wildfire Service. These are relationships that we cultivate like throughout the winter when the snow is flying. We're working.
I guess knowing that each organization and each person you count on, their capacity, their training level. You've talked about how you'll work with them when there's trouble about. So a lot of that it means because organizations change all the time. People move, they move on, they retire. So I guess that's an evergreen task for you, is to know who you're working with and what capacities they have.
Yeah, the whole emergency preparedness piece of our job is never finished. It's always happening, just as much as new people are coming into roles, new streets are being added, new buildings are being built, new training strategies and tactics and techniques and technology coming to our job. It's another piece that keeps it interesting is when I started 30 years ago, we would have laughed about the idea of drones. You wouldn't comprehend it. You couldn't. And now here we are, where like drones are now being used, for fire suppression, but also for fire ignition. In the last few weeks, the Wildfire Services completed their pilot of setting prescribed fire with drones.
Wow. So that opens up a different avenue and precision, I imagine.
Yeah, and I can only imagine where it's going to be 30 years from now.
So when most people hear the title fire chief, they probably think about you just barking orders at people, but your role touches everything from planning to training to budgeting to recruitment, prevention, emergency management, I'm sure maintenance, I'm sure procurement. So what would surprise people most about your job?
I think it's the varied nature. I shared with you that I can plan my day with all of those things, budget meetings and meeting with suppliers and training and planning and policy. But, it can change in a moment when an emergency happens. And I think just the varied nature of it would probably surprise people, but it's what keeps it attractive and keeps me going in that role.
So you touched on this because there's been so much growth, not just in West Kelowna and Westbank First Nation, but the whole central Okanagan. So how has that growth changed the demands on your department?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. Number one, our cities are densifying, whether it is like 4 or 6 story buildings, or even here today we look outside and we see 40-story buildings on this side of the lake. That is potentially coming to our side of the lake too. So being prepared to respond to those new building types where the population density is higher and the fires are fought differently in those types of buildings. A lot of people think that you can only have a building as tall as you have a ladder for the fire department, and that's not the case. Like, these buildings now are going to 40 plus stories in our region and 100 plus stories in our province. And there's no way a ladder will reach that height. It calls for an entirely different type of firefighting, where the fires are fought from inside the building and people are rescued in the stairwells, and it for our fire department is a new evolving thing. We're working hard to be ready for as our community grows that way.
I know Mayor Milsom, we've had him on an episode of Finding Solutions, and he and council are very proud of the investments they've made, particularly in Lakeview Heights with Fire Hall 32. So are improving those facilities, is that kind of the name of the game right now to kind of keep up with the growth that's occurred in this region?
Yeah, for us, it's across the board. It really, in the grand scheme of things, was less than 20 years ago, our fire department didn't have any full-time firefighters. And, now here we are 20 years later, we have 44 firefighters, 8 of which are on duty, every day around the clock in our community, which is a massive increase. We have the greatest equipment, not only to keep our staff safe, but to also help us do our jobs to, rescue the public and protect property. Our facilities have come a long way. We've made drastic improvements in replacement of one of our fire halls that was very, very old, and we have a beautiful new facility there now in Lakeview Heights that not only is it pleasant to work out of, there's lots of natural light and it's very comfortable, but it's also so much safer for the firefighters and to deal with the contaminants and the biohazards that are a part of their job. This facility is designed to mitigate that. It was 11 years ago when I came to the department and I heard from the men and women they have nowhere to train. We were training on schools. We were like throwing our ladders up on the outside of school buildings, and the school district was very cooperative with us, but we were doing damage and causing inconvenience. And we now have a state-of-the-art training center in our department where the firefighters can go anytime and practice. There's really only one skill they can't practice at our training center, and it's swift water rescue, because we don't have a river there for them to go in. But literally anything else they do in their job, they can go to the training center and they can practice it there.
So you have a composite where you have both volunteers and you have paid professional firefighters. And it sounds to me you've been trying to get them the kit and the facilities so they can be their best. So what kind of things retains firefighters, you think, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think more and more so now, I don't think for any of us it's ever been about the money. But I think more so now it's about, are we being kept safe doing our jobs? Are we being well taken care of from a health and wellness perspective? When I started, we never thought about how am I taking care of my mind. Now we do a lot.
So mental health is something that you do. Is that something you've seen change quite a bit since you started?
Yeah, I started in a world of don't talk about it, and if we don't talk about it, it's not a problem. But what we found is that things pile up then, and now very different. We are encouraged to talk about it, and there's a lot of support there for firefighters. But there's still a lot of work to be done. A mental health injury it's an illness. It's an injury. That person is sick, but it's not like a broken arm. You don't often see it, and it doesn't present the same way. As a fire chief, it weighs heavy on me, really heavy. We ask our people to do very difficult things sometimes, and I can think of a career of difficult things, but some of these things are really awful, things that normal people should or would never see. Mm-hmm. As a part of their day-to-day lives. And I'm asking my firefighters to deal with it repeatedly, and having a way for them to unpack that and process it so that it doesn't pile up throughout a career is something we're working hard on, but we're still not there. Well,
I think you said it's a culture too. In military, for example, there was for a long-standing period of time, no one talked, as you said, about mental health. Mm-hmm. It's something you just kind of park and leave aside. Now, I also know from speaking to some representatives from the IAFF that there's a growing concern when it comes to the type of uniform or equipment that they use, where there's chemicals. Could you maybe just tell the audience a little bit about what some of those challenges are? Because it sounds like it's a lot more complicated than any of us would have imagined.
Yeah, and you asked me earlier about what might surprise the public. This is something that might. The two biggest challenges that we face when it comes to my team and the firefighters is mental health and cancer. These are the two things that are killing firefighters across our country, and it's horrible. No one should have to die for going to work and doing their job, yet it's happening. And it's not something that's happening somewhere else. Like, we've lost a firefighter in our department because of cancer, and I think of Captain Russell every day. So, cancer is a big challenge, and a lot of work is being done, good work, to look at, like, why is the rate of cancer higher in firefighters than it is in the general population? And, that probably will come as no surprise to people. Like, we breathe in a lot of really bad stuff when we go to a fire. But we also, have the best equipment available to protect us from that. So why is this still happening? Even though every fire we go in, we're not breathing that anymore. We're breathing bottled air on our backs. Very sophisticated equipment that protects us, but cancer rates are still going up. And, trying to grasp an understanding of why. We continue to improve. Like, science has shown that after a fire, the most toxic, deadly chemicals are absorbed by firefighters, and they're absorbed like right here around your neck, and they're absorbed on your face. So something as simple as, like, not putting your dirty hands on your face after a fire can cut the absorption of these toxic chemicals by exponential amounts. But what's the first thing you do after you come out of, like, working hard and sweaty is, like, put your hands on your face. So, something simple like providing disinfectant wipes for firefighters at the scene of a fire, so that, like, wipe your hands, wipe your face. You're going to cut your cancer risk by doing this. But there's other pieces we need to figure out too, and it turns out a lot of work been done lately around a cancer-causing chemical that is actually put on the outside of the equipment that we wear.
Yes.
And, we wear this equipment for a really good reason. It is to keep us safe from everything we're exposed to, the heat, the flames, the smoke, the toxic chemicals. But it turns out that in order for it to do that properly, and it relates specifically to the waterproof ability of our turnout gear, it's treated with this chemical. And up until now, there is no good answer about, is there something else that we can replace that with that, keeps us dry, but isn't linked to cancer.
When this was first raised by some local firefighters, I actually wrote to the company that makes the equipment and asking them to see if they were planning to replace that type with maybe a different technology that might not have the same health concerns. But since that time, I've learned how serious that you and your department take decontamination protocols. Even with training now, I guess there's basically you don't put on the full kit unless it's a full fire to try and limit that exposure. But as the co-chair of the all-party Parliamentary Cancer Caucus, I think this is something that we need to push that company a little bit more and push, quite honestly, governments to lean in on these companies, because you know what? The incidence of cancer are much, much higher in the firefighting population.
And I think it's advancing the science. Like having turnout gear that is waterproof is really important. If you wear a wet set of gear into a hot fire, it creates steam, and the potential for burn is there, and it's just not as effective. So it needs to be dry. And the way to keep it dry for a period of time was using these forever chemicals. So it's a trade-off. But advancing the science to be able to say, like, yes, there is something else we can use is where that needs to happen. And these companies have a responsibility to help advance that science.
Yeah, well, again, we have granting councils too to pay for that fundamental basic research and then to see it translated into commercialization. But anyway, I do appreciate, Chief, you talking about these things very openly, because I do think that the health of your men and women are really important. Now, one of the things that I absolutely have to touch on, because it was so scarred onto so many people's minds recently, at least on the west side, and to some extent in Kelowna as well, McDougall Creek fire. When you first learned that there was a wildfire burning behind the community, what ran through your mind?
Yeah, it's one that we talk a lot about, and that for me is I wouldn't say a nightmare scenario at that point, but it's a very concerning scenario of a fire burning behind your community, is either, it goes one of two ways. Like it gets caught and put out, or like weather influences in such a way that it comes to your community. And as I say, we talked about that scenario and worked through it. And when the call came, like the communication between us and the wildfire service was very good. And right away they were letting me know what they were doing, but they were also letting me know that like the fire was in a really challenging place. It was not somewhere that I could just take our people and equipment and go in there and fight it. It was inaccessible. And the wildfire service was doing what they could, but we also knew that there was a weather change coming the next day, and immediately we were up in the helicopter and looking and really starting to plan. But it quickly came down to a scenario where like, what can we do? And I have the luxury of having men and women and equipment and training that I can throw at a problem. If it's a house on fire or it's a small fire in a neighborhood. But when it came to an event like that, like our tools became like, we need to get people out of the way.
I think what you said there, when it became an event, because I'm sure there was a point where it stopped being just a wildfire behind the community and became something that was a community emergency event. So when did you realize that you were facing something that was unprecedented?
Yeah, it was when we, it was like every hour for the first, probably 36 hours of that event, that realization was built, like just doubling and doubling and doubling, right? But when the math was done very early on around taking what was going on and then adding the weather, that's when the potential of it, really became apparent, and the planning became, not just like a couple of trucks and a few helicopters. It was like, we need to get every resource we can here, and then begin to look at, not only getting a few dozen homes out of the way, but getting like hundreds and hundreds of homes and thousands of people out of the way of us, so we could do our work, but also potentially out of the way of the fire. And for me, this all came like about a week and a half after Maui had a really significant wildfire. And of course, like firefighting is my passion. So I follow this, whether it's happening here or somewhere else. And, I have ties to Maui. I've spent a lot of time there. And so I watched it as it happened to them a week and a half before us. And their entire community destroyed.
People running into the ocean because they had no place to go.
Like hundreds of people killed, and like in one particular place that sticks with me, 30 people killed because they couldn't get past a fallen tree, and they had no way out. And then here we were a week later experiencing the event that we were experiencing, and so all of that running through my head as the fire chief. I'm not very effective if I'm out there with a shovel and a hose. My effectiveness is leading and coordinating. But there comes a point when, there's only so much of that you can do. And there was a point for me in that event where I heard our firefighters were trapped. And they were trapped because they were going back in to make sure everybody got out. And, I can't go and get them out at that point. It really became like, we just have to rely on the training and the equipment and the people that we have in place. Now's the moment that we have all built up to. And, for me, that night, that was the moment.
Well, I just want to raise to your point about how touch and go it was. I spoke to some Central Okanagan search and rescue volunteers who were out in Lake Okanagan Resort. And one family, their car had broken down. And quite honestly, they didn't know what to do. And so they said, "You're coming with us," and literally scooped them out. And of course, that particular part of the hotel was burned. And so the fact we didn't have any loss of life. Now, I still remember this. You described a night feeling like 100 years worth of firefighting in one night.
Yeah, we had firefighters who literally, that was their first fire. They had just joined us, completed their training, come onto the job. And like that was their first event.
Wow.
And, you know, that night, those firefighters fought more fire than most firefighters ever will in their career. They fought more fire than most firefighters would in 100 years if they were on the job. It really was 100 years of firefighting, all done up in one night. And, you know, there was a lot of moments. There's thousands and thousands of stories, some of which I still hear today. Like I'll go to the coffee table and sit with the firefighters, and they'll tell me about something that happened to them, and you know, one of their stories or something that they're holding on to after that fire, and it still amazes me, you know. And I got to be the guy on the pointy end of that spear, but you know, some days it felt like I was just along for the ride. There's so many things happening.
Well, you've also been quick to credit others. So what would you like people to understand about just the firefighters, first responders, the emergency staff, the volunteers, residents, everyone who kind of rallied to get the community through that?
I have an amazing team of people, and you know, I am the one who's often, as I say, on the pointy end of the spear. I have a camera in front of me telling their story. But you know, I have 4 deputy and assistant chiefs who really made that event work. They were the ones who were out there on the ground directing things and relaying things back to me, and then I got, you know, to tell their stories in the media and share it with the public. But it was like that across the board. You know, I mentioned earlier the importance of relationships, right? And you wouldn't do what we were able to do without having trust and without having strong relationships. I asked for help. Like, our community was about to be decimated, and you know, we have a system in our province that will get that help. We had 50 plus fire apparatus from 38 different fire departments who came, and I didn't have to phone 38 different fire chiefs. Like, you know, I didn't have a big Rolodex of people. I had just a couple phone calls to make. And all those fire chiefs blindly sent their people and their equipment to work under me and my team in West Kelowna. And we were devastated by the losses. Still am. Hard to look over there, actually. But the thousands of homes that were saved because of these firefighters is pretty amazing. And,
yes.
And you know, I got to every day tell the stories. Right, and there was lots that didn't get told, and that's probably good. But you know, being able to hear about like a firefighter who came here from the Lower Mainland, and he was all set for his citizenship ceremony, and he's gonna miss it because he was here fighting the fire, and so some strings were pulled and some things were done, and this firefighter got to have his citizenship ceremony on the front seat of the fire truck out in the field. And it still gives me goosebumps today to think about
it does.
The chief there and his citizenship ceremony that took place.
That's amazing. So one thing I noticed is that in the community, once the community got through the shock and the initial evacuations, it was almost like there was a flip of a switch where they started seeing people coming in from around the province, where people started saying, what can I do? Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that one of the challenges for everyone was the coordination of all of these resources from everyone wanting to help.
Yeah, and you know, it's a big part of our job in an emergency, and it, again, it very much aligns with, you know, the experts and professionals in our military, just on a smaller scale. You know, how do you fuel 50 fire trucks when you're used to only fueling 8? How do you, you know, make sure that everybody has gloves and shoelaces and food and water, and we had to put together an army of people to support our army. Uh-huh. And, you know, a big part of that was the public. In the early days, they were bringing us like cookies and you know, somebody drop off like literally a pallet of Gatorade and, you know, or a pallet of water, or just the salesperson for this company here, this is yours. But it got to the point very quickly where like we couldn't deal with all of it, and it wasn't safe because people are bringing like potato salad and egg salad sandwiches for the firefighters, and like, yeah. I can't feed them that. Like, you have to stop. But instead, can you like make a sign, and could you send a card, or could you come at shift change 6 p.m. and just like with a word of encouragement for the firefighters? And like literally within a day, the outside of the fire hall is plastered with signs. And at 6 o'clock, I'm sitting in our command post one of these days, and like you hear like sirens and horns and yelling, and you go outside, and it is a full-on parade, and we called it the shift change parade because the public, who was likely evacuated and looking for something to do, took that to heart, came down to the fire hall, like brought their kids. They had signs, and then the firefighters are using the sirens, and it was such a boost.
I'm so happy you reminded me of that, because that was something rather magical when you saw people who, were in such a panic in every other stage of their lives, but that was so important for them to make.
Yeah, I think it gave people something that they could do.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't token, because the firefighters still tell the stories about, the people who came and the signs that were made. And
That's amazing.
We didn't keep all of them because we couldn't, but we kept one. And it still hangs in the fire hall today. And it makes me emotional to think about it, because we walk by it every day, and it's a reminder. But it's an important reminder. It says, thanks for doing everything that you could. And then there's, from a family and their address at the bottom. And very early on, I looked up the address, and it was a house that was destroyed. But this family still took the time to come and say thank you and to make that sign. And I don't, maybe they watch your podcast, but, they should know that it still hangs in the fire hall today, and we still get emotional about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling the same feeling right now, because it's anyway. I just imagine the community support, and that's only continued. Now, just changing gears a little bit, because you've really built a very strong reputation around the world. Like, you've spoken at the United Nations. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but also just coming out of this epic experience of the best and the worst, all that 100 years in one night. What was the biggest lesson, you think, that was learned at McDougall Creek fire?
I couldn't say it was just one. We were learning personal lessons. We were learning lessons about relationships. We were learning lessons about doing things that you never thought you could do, or getting through days that you never thought you could get through. We were learning lessons as a fire department about, boy, we could sure use this new piece of equipment. We were learning lessons as a fire service about, embers are serious, serious business. And the textbooks didn't used to say they can cross Okanagan Lake at a distance of almost 4 kilometers. And, so we're learning lessons as a community. We're learning lessons in, I still maintain, my philosophy, and I was fortunate to be supported by, my leadership and by the mayor, was to bring the community along with us. And, I was given the latitude to do that, and that was our philosophy. We turned no interview with the media down, because we wanted people to understand that, we weren't just some faceless bureaucracy who was fighting fires. We were your neighbors, and we were dealing with something that was really tough. And I got the latitude to tell stories every day about what the firefighters were facing, and it was genuine. That's who I am. No,
those briefings, just as an elected official, and obviously, I do think that elected officials should be really out of the way while they're the emergency, while professionals like yourself and BC Wildfire are taking the lead. But they were very helpful to me, just to kind of get a sense of where we were at, and the community too, because they needed to know if there was an area that was going to be under evacuation, they needed to know that they had to have that kit ready. Yeah. And so I really do just want to say thank you to everyone who helped make that happen every day.
But life changed for me after August 16th, and really has been very different. What I did was, it is part of the role of fire chief's job, but we never really anticipate it's going to be on a large scale like that. Being able to share our story on CNN and BBC and the Al Jazeera and was an amazing opportunity. But also, being able to formulate a message about preparedness and about, learning to live with this risk has been, a big part of my job since. it's such an honor to be able to go to the United Nations and share the story of our community. You know, like I was given no parameters other than come and share the story of what your community had just experienced and gone through. And I got to go there and do that on behalf of, you know, all the residents in our region. And you know, it's something that you'd never picture you'd get to do as a, you know, fire chief from West Kelowna.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I will say that in addition to elected officials, when you have a premier or a prime minister, again, they should always be defer to make sure they're not becoming part of the problem. But I have to say, whether it had been Mr. Harper and Ms. Clark when she was premier coming, it was important then, and it was just as important with David Eby as premier and Justin Trudeau as prime minister, because people need to know they're appreciated. And I just want to state for the record that you know, that's one thing I will always welcome, because it's the supporting the people that were facing the biggest challenge. I thought that was very important. Well, and I was happy that he took you to the United Nations as well.
I'll agree with you there. You know, my role as fire chief is to serve apolitically and you know, allow mayor and council and our MP and MLA to handle the politics. But, you know, when the leader of your country says, I'm going to come, not only is it a boost to the firefighters and I think the community as a whole, but I also think, and I'll tell you a funny story about that, but I also think like having the country witness what's going on through that person's eyes is also really important. And for us as firefighters, having, you know, the prime minister of the country come and witness what we were going through was really important for us.
No, it was the right thing to do, because that's what leaders should do. And,
so I said to the firefighters, like, having a special guest, you know, all of the pieces around when the prime minister comes, and we need to clean up. You know, we're in the midst of this, and some, you know, like we weren't actively firefighting at that point, but we were still mopping up, and said, so let's clean up the fire hall. Like, let's, you know, sweep up and hose down and make it fitting for a visit of that nature. So, you know, they did, and everybody was tired and we were busy. But I can tell you, when the Vancouver Canucks came, the fire hall has never been cleaner than that. So, you know, apologies to the former prime minister of our country, but I mean, it was spick and span when Quinn Hughes, the captain at the time, came and paid us a visit.
That's pretty amazing. So maybe we'll talk about some of the lessons that you've taken from it. And I know that you've spent a lot of time briefing. I've brought members of Parliament through Dane Lloyd, who was at the time our Shadow Minister for Emergency Management. And you've always been very good to give us time and insight, and I know you did that with everyone. Maybe we can talk a little bit about FireSmart, because I do know that FireSmart, the provincial organization, actually did a discussion about what they found and wanted to talk about how we can approach FireSmart as a valley. What are some of the things you have been pushing since McDougall Creek fire, and what has been some of the changes you've seen, positive, negative?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's really simple. I said it at the United Nations, and I've said it every chance I get since, and I'll say it and then explain it. We're spending the money on the wrong end of the problem. It is that simple. When we spend millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions, including insurance losses and lumping the actual true cost into these fires, if we could spend a fraction of that over a long period of time preventing those fires, that's where our success is going to lie. And I'm not here to say, like, you know, if we only would have had more money, we would have stopped that fire. That's not the case. But sustained, prolonged investment in prevention is going to be the key to, you know, not having entire communities decimated by wildfire. You know, like, climate change is a very politicized word, and you know, so we'll say a changing climate instead. You know, I know after 31 years of firefighting in the Okanagan, something has changed. Like, our hotter days are hotter. Our windier days are windier. We have more smoky days than ever before. We never had a metric to measure smoky days until really recently, and now it's something that's measured. And we are not going to just fireproof everything and stop having wildfires. We're going to need to learn to adjust as a society, and do some things so that these fires don't decimate our communities, so that they don't cause. The only tool we have is to evacuate the entire town. And that has happened like multiple times this year already. So we're never going to get away from fighting them. And trust me, I'm an advocate for firefighters and boots on the ground, good equipment, good training, good strategies and tactics, good leadership. We're going to need that in order to deal with these fires that we're seeing now. But we should be spending like even a fraction of that money on prevention.
Well, Murray Wilson, a retired forester and also behind the documentary BC is Burning, he's talked about how in California they've done exactly that. They've started investing in that prevention, clearing that fuel. And in my previous riding of Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola, they had a wildfire just outside of Logan Lake. And the mayor and even the premier at the time, John Horgan, attributed Logan Lake's success at pushing back that fire because it was very close. Was largely because they were a FireSmart community, and they had taken the revenues from a community forest, and every year they invested it in FireSmart. Every year they would apply to the Government of Canada for the summer jobs program, and they would put youth to work clearing out that fuel. So I totally agree with you that we need to think differently, and regardless of the rationale, because it is happening. And people when they speak to me, and I'm sure you have the same thing, they want solutions. So in terms of funding for FireSmart, since you've made those points, and again, you've said it in Ottawa, you've said it in New York at the United Nations, you've said it here on this program today. So what has changed since then? Has there been that steady funding for FireSmart? Has it been put towards the things we need to do as a valley?
Dan, I think we are slowly but surely raising the awareness of people. We are seeing more demand and more activity on the part of the public in order to become more FireSmart. And we can't do it all. I can't go to everyone's house and move their wood piles and clean their gutters out. The public needs to take this responsibility, and we're slowly but surely seeing more of it. But we are also seeing so many horrible examples still out there. People are still buying and installing cedar hedges. Mm-hmm. And I get that once you have a cedar hedge, it is very expensive to deal with and remove. But we shouldn't be putting any new ones in, for example. And cedar hedges have become like a lightning rod for a whole bunch of FireSmart things. So, the public, we as a society still have a lot of work to do. We have an annual FireSmart conference where 800 professionals from across British Columbia get together and talk about FireSmart. And this year they kicked off the conference by playing a video. And the video was from 1960s black and white. And the video was a scientist trying to convince people about the benefits of wearing a seatbelt, because seatbelts were a new thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, they're putting together these videos saying these are new, but they'll save your life. That's kind of where we're at with FireSmart today, is we are still so early in trying to convince people that what was once okay is now not okay. So
for an individual property owner who is in an interface area where these threats exist, could you give me 2, 3, 4, 5 quick things that they should absolutely not do in terms of new things, or maybe things that they could remediate immediately that would reduce the risk?
Well, FireSmart's not about being perfect. You'll never build a fireproof house, although we have a lot of exciting examples of people trying. And it's about being better. So people need to look at what we call the immediate zone, that first 1.5 meters or 5 feet around your house. There should be nothing in that zone that is combustible. no plantings that are combustible, no building materials that are combustible, no wood piles, no propane tanks, no coconut mats at your front door, no, old rattan patio furniture. There should be nothing combustible in that zone. That is the number one thing people can do. And generally, that's also not very expensive. It's more of like a cleanup activity, or making a better choice if you're renovating or building. The reason we are asking that is because of what we've learned about embers. In our fire, they looked at 106 of the homes that were destroyed. And it wasn't a wall of flame that destroyed the majority of those homes. As a matter of fact, in 104 of the cases, it was an ember storm that caused the destruction of those homes.
I remember that one of the facilitators at that FireSmart presentation with all the elected officials showed footage where they would show from those video cameras that ember would hit down, land on a mat, and for a few minutes it would smoke, and then it would light on fire, and then that's what did it in. Or as you said, the cedar hedges, and just the way the wind went up from the side up to there. So what are some other things that people can do, you think, that would be worth their time?
Well, I've seen it with my own eyes. I've witnessed it. Again, like just, touching on embers and their impacts. An ember storm is like a snowstorm. And, being the good Canadians we all are, we all know what a snowstorm is like. Uh-huh. We know that the wind blows the snow and it piles up in areas. It piles up in corners of our home. It piles up in our eaves and our gutters. It maybe lands and blows into a particular place in our yard. People need to, envision that snowstorm and realize that that is the same place that embers are going. So whether it's a mat at your front door or a wood pile where, snow piles up, or even further out in your yard, like a particular tree or a bush where the snow will pile up, embers are going there in the summer. And, moving those things and dealing with those. Now we see people who are like renovating or building homes, for example, and just encouraging people to use that as an opportunity to, do some very simple things to make your home more resilient to wildfire. Ensuring that it's non-combustible, coatings on the outside of homes, fire-resistant roofing, for example, is another one.
So for individual homeowners, for them to do that audit, that's really important. There's lots of resources on the internet for this.
Yeah, like FireSmart BC and FireSmart Canada nationally are incredible resources. Like, it's almost to the point where like there are too many resources. They publish a landscaping guide that literally lists like hundreds of types of plants you should and shouldn't plant. It's almost too much for people to wade through. So what I do is I go back and they publish a coloring book, and it's like 11 pages designed for like, ages 3 to 5. And I say to people, like, if you're confused by any of this, go to the coloring book, because it tells the kids, basic. Like, tell your parents to, rake up leaves and needles around their home. Like, there really are simple things like that that won't fireproof your home, but can make a difference and give us a chance. We can't be everywhere. And I have a picture that I'd show you, like, of a straw mat that's burned at a front door. And the house was saved because firefighters saw it burning and went and threw it out into the roadway. But we can't be at every house, and we can't, throw out every burning piece of lawn furniture. And that's why homes are lost.
Well, that individual responsibility is important too, because taking care of your property and making sure it doesn't become a problem for someone else as well. Now, going back to the example of Logan Lake, they made as a community a focus, but the province also gave them the resources that allowed them to be able to do that work by giving them that community forest. Maybe there's not that opportunity in every community, but maybe we can talk just briefly right now. You said before that the system is right now incentivized to spend money at the wrong end of things. So you say it's getting better. Is it getting better? Are these funds widely available? Are they sustainable? One of the things I remember as a municipal councillor, one of the biggest criticisms we had of federal or provincial programs is we called it the grant du jour, where it was a one and done. And you can't run a sustainable, resilient program like FireSmart 1 year.
So, we have a very active FireSmart program. I have a great team of people who are involved in delivering that in the community. And the province of BC has been a great partner alongside of us. They did recognize in some small way, what is being said about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We count on grant funding from the province to deliver our program in the way we do. But I will also say that our mayor and council puts the same amount of money into the pot. So our community is also invested in delivering that. And by putting those two components together, we've been able to deliver an evolving FireSmart program. We've been able to, push the province to look at, 2 years worth of funding as opposed to every year look at allocation funding where we know the money's coming as opposed to having to apply and compete for it. Those were all wins, but unfortunately now there's some uncertainty around what does the program look like in future years. And I cannot think of any better example of our experience here in this region that speaks to the importance of it. We had a fire just outside the window here across the lake in Kelowna Park several weeks ago where the neighborhood was saved because FireSmart activities were done in the park. It is just that simple. You can walk through there and it is readily apparent that the fire never got up into the treetops. And the reason it didn't was because there were activities undertaken to prevent that. The ground was cleaned up, the branches were stripped up, the tree trunks, and that allowed us to get in there and aggressively fight that fire and protect that neighborhood. There is a direct link between the money that was spent through FireSmart on that park and the fact that we didn't have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of insurance losses there.
And right now the federal government doesn't contribute. It's provincial and local funds.
That's right. And I think wildfire is now a national problem. I don't think that there is a province and to some degree a territory that isn't affected by wildfire now, from the East Coast to the West Coast. And we really need to begin shaping things that we're doing nationally around wildfire and the risk that it poses. So, we've, as I say, have up until now had a very great working relationship and partnership with the province. We want to build on that. We fight fires incredibly well together. We want to now continue to prevent fires well together, but also, would love to have the federal government at the table. We did a plan at the end of 2025 for our community, and it laid out 1,000 hectares that we needed to work on, and FireSmart land that either the city or the province owned that needs to have this work done, including a fire break behind our community like Logan Lake had done. It can cost us up to $10,000 a hectare to do that work, and that's a big lump sum of money, $10 million that we need to do that work. And we can deliver on a plan to get it done in 10 years, but we need $1 million a year to deliver on it.
But those resources have to be there, and there has to be that continued, like I said, you can't just do a grant du jour where it's a one and done.
Yeah, looking for sustainable, reliable funding, but also, I think the more work we do on it, the better we are and the more effective case we can make to say $10 million spent, executing on the plan that we made is like, that's the loss of 10 homes.
Yeah. No. And again, to the economy, and again, we always end up paying. Someone pointed out to me, you either pay in time, and sweat, or you pay in money and tears. So it's absolutely there, what you're saying. Now, you mentioned Kelowna Park, and I know that in the news there's been a number of other, maybe not as highly paid attention to, but there's been a number of small fires that are apparently human caused. Now, without compromising any investigations or whatnot, what can you tell us about some of these fires? Is it a growing concern for you and for the department? for fire rescue?
I think carelessness is a major factor in these fires. And when I say carelessness, whether it's a cigarette butt out the window, which was one a couple of weeks ago, or whether it is someone choosing to have a campfire when campfires, in a place where campfires are never permitted, at a time when campfires shouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's carelessness, put politely. Or whether it's like an inappropriate use of fire, someone using fire in a way that is just not safe for the community. These are all factors that we're dealing with, and sometimes we're able to get there while they're small or unnoticed, and other times they're much bigger and they cause bigger issues. So we're being pulled in ways that we weren't necessarily pulled in the early stages of my career.
Well, one thing that I've seen, and this is something that I've been contacted by a number of constituents about, is there's a concern that there are some people, and I'm not being without compassion, because everyone who's phoned me says, look, I'm as compassionate as the next person, but what they see is there are people that are without homes, that are being removed. Maybe they've been pushed off of one site by a property owner or been asked to leave by the RCMP, and they're going out into Crown lands, and they're going further and further. And whether it's for cooking or for warmth or whatever, it is causing a lot of consternation. Is that something that you're starting to see more of, and is that a worry of yours?
We are, but we're seeing it across the board. And, for me, it is really a respect thing. I have a great compassion for, people who are homeless in our community, and it's a real complex challenge. But, appropriate use of fire is really important, and not putting people's lives at risk, despite the complexity of our homeless problem, or the problem that is facing people to make their homes in inappropriate places. Having respect for the power and danger of fire mixed into that is really important. And these are conversations like our police officers, our bylaw officers, our firefighters are having with unhoused people in our community about, you need to treat this with respect, and it's not appropriate to have this. But also, just as much, we are seeing that same disrespect of fire by, populations of our society that aren't homeless. Yeah. People, just in general, are getting further and further and further out into the backcountry, and they are being more and more careless with the way that they're doing it, because they think it won't happen to them. They're leaving fire unattended. They're not putting it out. We have the Okanagan Force Task Force who has actually shifted from picking up garbage that people are leaving behind to now putting out fires that people are leaving behind. And it's a respect thing. Yeah. If people want to be able to do this activity in the backcountry, and we all do, they need to respect it, right? And not leave unattended fire, and not leave burning garbage, and not leave. People think it'll never happen to me, but cigarette butts do start fires.
Yes. And
it's something people have to think about.
Well, and again, it's that individual responsibility and thinking about those around you. So it's FireSmart, whether it's be looking after your own property to help your neighborhood, or whether it be regionally, making sure that you're not part of the problem and part of the solution is always there. So, Chief, I know we've had you for a lot here today, and there's been a lot that we've talked about. If you could leave our viewers of Finding Solutions with just a message today, what would you want people to walk away from this conversation with?
Yeah, I think, whether it's cigarette butts or whether it's, immense wildfires that are descending on our community, we are all in this together. I get to lead a team of men and women who only want to do good and only want to improve upon their community. But I'd rather not place them in that situation in the first place. So, an all of society approach to, not only the careless use of fire, but wildfire in particular, is where we have to go. We can't as a fire department, be everywhere at once. We can't build a fire department big enough to fight McDougall Creek and just have it waiting. People need to take responsibility. Like, we don't say like you have to quit smoking. We say you have to be responsible with your cigarette butts. That's my perspective. We don't say stop going to the backcountry. We say actually we need you in the backcountry because your eyes are important in a wildfire season. But when you're there, like, you need to be aware and you need to be responsible with the fire that you're using, and make good choices around your landscaping. And if you have the opportunity to make your home more resilient, it's going to add to your property value. And there's a good chance, we're driving these neighborhoods where fires have happened and people don't understand why one house is standing and another isn't, and it's very indiscriminate. Well, it's because like either the work of firefighters stopped that fire, or the home was resilient enough to withstand that wildfire event, and we need people to get their homes to that place.
Well, Chief, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you, and please pass on my thanks, my gratitude to everyone that you work with. There's I've found, whether it be working with firefighters, police, Canadian Armed Forces, that duty to serve, that duty to put themselves on the line for others, that's something that I know that the people of our riding strongly believe in and are thankful for. And I just, again, like to thank you for your service here today. And so, folks, we've had a great conversation with Chief Brolund, and he's given us a lot for us to consider, both as individuals, as neighborhoods, and as communities. There are solutions there. Please take advantage of some of the resources that Fire Chief Brolund has said. Again, FireSmart BC has a website, so does FireSmart Canada, and avail yourself of those things. Chief, if people have other questions, where should they go to?
Reach out to your local fire department. There are great men and women in every community, large and small, who want to help and want to guide people in this way. So call your local fire chief.
Well, thank you again. So whether it's FireSmart, emergency preparedness, firefighter health, community resilience, or sharing lessons learned with others, Fire Chief Brolund has consistently focused on helping communities, and not just his own, but across this great country. And the Okanagan is fortunate to have leaders who not only respond to when disaster strikes, but that they work day to day to prevent them. So thank you again, and thank you to you for joining us for another episode of Finding Solutions. And thank you. We have a great list of a library now available online of our Okanagan stories and solutions. So just like Fire Chief Brolund, please take a chance to take a look at the library and see what local leaders like him are doing for our communities. Until next time, let's keep finding solutions together.